Lucas is a senior from Marlborough, Massachusetts, majoring in international studies with a medical humanities minor. He loves playing guitar, learning about the world, and watching TED Talks. He is fascinated by the intersection of international relations and global health, and this talk comes from his thesis research on that topic. So please, everyone, give a warm welcome to Lucas.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all so much for coming here tonight. First, I just want to thank John and Mooj, who've been putting this whole thing on, getting all these great speakers together. Can we have a round of applause for John and Mooj? Yeah, it's tough to follow Christopher's last talk and all the talks, but I'll do my best. I know when you see the word patent, it's kind of one of those words where you're like, oh no, this is going to be really boring. But I believe that things that can seem boring can still have huge impact for human lives. Christopher just talked about medications and how important they are to human life, so it's only fitting that I'll follow him up and talk about pharmaceutical patents. So I want to start out with this guy. You may recognize him. His name is Martin Shkreli. Some news outlets called him the Pharma Bro, which is a great nickname. So Martin founded Turing Pharmaceutical, a pharmaceutical company last year. But contrary to what you'd think a pharmaceutical company does, Turing Pharmaceutical's only strategy is to buy old drugs and to jack up the prices like ridiculously high. So he made news in September 2015 for raising the price of Daraprim, which is a drug for opportunistic infections for people with HIV and AIDS. He jacked it up 5,500%, which is just insane, and it earned him the distinction of the most despised man in America, which is really saying a lot. But I think the funniest thing about this story for me is like everything he did was completely legal, right? Like that wasn't illegal. And there are thousands of things you can do that are illegal, but none of them make you the most despised man in America like legal pharmaceutical practices do. So that's kind of going to be my entry into discussing the pharmaceutical system. And also I want to say what this brought attention to is actually pretty normal practice. Gilead is a pharmaceutical company that developed a drug for hepatitis C. It's great. It has a much better cure rate than the other cure that existed before that, less side effects. It's great. The only problem is it costs $1,000 for a little pill or $84,000 for the whole treatment. And most people with hep C don't have $84,000 lying around to pay for this treatment. So Gilead got a lot of bad PR, is still getting a lot of bad PR from activists, protesters, saying they're making a killing off people. You see bloodsuckers. But I don't want to demonize Martin Shkreli or Gilead or any of the pharmaceutical companies. Martin Shkreli recently said in an interview, like, in his typical, like, really bombastic ways, like, why don't you try being a CEO of a pharmaceutical company and selling drugs for low prices and keeping your job? Because it's kind of the way the system works, that you're responsible to your shareholders. You have to charge a lot for medicines to keep your job, to make profits. But the problem is, the majority of people who need medicines for sickness do not have the money to pay for them. So these patents are raising the prices often beyond what's accessible to the most of the people who are affected by disease. So I'm going to briefly just talk about patents, why they exist. So pharmaceutical companies have to spend a lot of money on research and development to create a drug. They need to pay all the scientists. They need to do all the clinical trials, and they need to pay for advertising. They need to pay those like voiceover guys in the commercials that say all the side effects, like blah, 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 super fast. They spend a lot of money. So they need some way to recoup all this investment that they're putting in. And that's where patents come in. So patents give the creator of something, like a pharmaceutical product, a medicine, they give that creator the sole right, a monopoly. Only they can sell this product for 20 years. That's called a patent monopoly, and it's designed to encourage innovation of new medicines, because if they didn't exist, anyone could come in and copy the medicine and then sell it for a lot cheaper. Because it actually usually it costs like very little money to actually make the medicine. But the first pill costs millions and millions of dollars, because you have to figure out how to make this medicine, make it work, and make it safe. So that's why we have this patent system. All right, so now I want to switch to the more equity side of my presentation. I want you all to imagine with me, what would a world look like where health is truly a human right? What would it look like for nutrition, for healthcare, for medicine, for treatment? Just picture that. The UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights has set out one vision for this. You see Article 25 is known as the Right to Health article, and it talks about food, clothing, housing, a bunch of stuff. But then also Article 27 talks about everyone has the right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So when I see that, I think of medicine, scientific advancement. It's made our lives a lot better. But the problem is, in our world as we live in it now, not everyone actually has that right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So briefly, the real world that we're living in now is very different from that world I just asked you to picture, right? I probably don't need to tell you this, but we live in a very insanely unequal world where for the past 2 centuries, Western countries of the US, European countries have been raising income, becoming wealthier, while other countries are still stuck in very low income settings. And this has had a very big impact on health, global health disparities. As you can see, the good news is for everyone, lives are getting healthier, people are living longer. That's so great. But the problem is that gap is still there. Almost 20 years gap based on where you're born. That's just insane to me. And the fact that it's been that way for so long, that as the West, as people in wealthy countries are living longer and healthier, that's not yet converged with the entire world. And one of the reasons for that is the disproportionate burden of diseases like HIV/AIDS. As you can see from these stats, 2 million more people will be infected with HIV this year, and 1.5 million estimated will die from complications due to AIDS. So as you can see, we're very far from the world I had you envision. Now, in that world where people have equal access to the rights, equal right to the access scientific advancement, if I told you there was a treatment for HIV, would you think that that number would still be 1.5 million deaths due to complications of AIDS every year? I would say no. It would probably be close to 0. And there is a treatment. There's been a treatment since 1996. It's called highly active antiretroviral therapy. And this drug works so well. They call it the Lazarus drug because people would just be like bedridden, like on the verge of death. Their immune system is just shot from AIDS, and antiretroviral therapy can bring them back to health really quickly. And at this point now, AIDS has become a chronic disease in this country where people can take the medicine every day and live a normal life and die of old age. But the problem is this kind of prognostication from when the drug was developed, the end of AIDS, that was only half right. It was the end of AIDS for people who could afford this medicine. But due to the patent system that would raise the price of this medicine, it was not nearly the end of AIDS at all, as the last slide showed. AIDS still continues. So due to the high price of this medicine, there was this debate in global public health circles. Where should we invest our money? And a lot of people thought the conventional wisdom was we should only invest in prevention in situations of poverty. Prevention is known as a more cost-effective approach, where if you can prevent the transmission of the virus, no one ever has it, and that's great, and you don't even have to treat it. I agree that prevention is a priority, but the problem is when you use it as an excuse to not treat people who are infected just because they're poor. As you can see, other people disagree and say people have the right to treatment no matter what their socioeconomic standing is, no matter how much money they have. So now I want to get more personal. I want to tell you why I'm passionate about this issue and how I got interested in it. So 2 years ago, I spent nearly 6 months, living and studying abroad in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And Brazil just captivated me, first with immense inequality right next to each other. You can see this picture of Rocinha, which is the largest favela or slum in all of Brazil. You have hundreds of thousands of people there. And down at the bottom of the hill, you have one of the richest neighborhoods in all of Latin America. But what really inspired me about Brazil was their effort to change, their effort to make human rights not just ideas, but to actually practice them, to make them a reality, including the right to health. Brazil became the first country in the developing world to universalize access to antiretroviral therapy. And what that means is anyone in this picture who has HIV, whether it's in these crowded slum-like conditions or in the rich high-rises near the beach, they all have equal access to free treatment if they have HIV. And I found that really inspiring. In 1990, it didn't look like this would happen. Brazil was a recipe for disaster. HIV and AIDS thrive in situations of inequality, and Brazil had the second worst epidemic in the world. But then due to domestic activism, government action, Brazil passed the law to universalize access. All right, but that was just the beginning of the struggle. So this model is a little crazy with all the arrows, so I apologize for that, but I'll explain it. The US and the European Union, where all of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies are situated and based, they got lobbied to enact tough intellectual property rules within the World Trade Organization, which makes sense because their countries benefit from these strict rules that made patents become mandatory for every country around the world that wanted to be part of the World Trade Organization. And I think that right there is telling that the most important rules on pharmaceuticals are not in the World Health Organization, but they're in the World Trade Organization. So that tells you something about how we view health as a commodity. But Brazil knew that to keep this universal treatment program sustainable, they would need to get lower prices than what patents would allow. They could not afford this as a middle-income country to pay high-price patent prices for antiretroviral medicine. So they threatened pharmaceutical companies saying, we'll completely disregard this patent and make our own copies of your drugs unless you lower the prices. And that move kind of gave them leverage to bargain the prices down and make this program sustainable. It also got them in hot water with the US, though. The US did the, international relations version of suing Brazil, taking it to the WTO court over these patent violations. But then Brazil went to their activists, treatment activists in Brazil and around the world, protesting about these issues that I'm talking to you about today, about the right to treatment, health as a human right. They engaged in this transnational network of advocacy and activism for the right to antiretroviral therapy. And they put a lot of pressure on the US. They gave pharmaceutical companies a lot of bad press, understandably, suing a country for trying to provide universal access to its people. And the US dropped the WTO case. And also, I should mention, this happened in many countries around the world, but I'm focusing on Brazil, partly because I've been there and I love this story, and it was the first. So how did this work out? Brazil's universal treatment program worked really, really well. Mortality went way down, which makes sense because the medicine keeps people alive. All the foreboding predictions about Brazil being a recipe for disaster, they turned out not to be true. But the most surprising thing was that this program that they said you shouldn't do because it costs too much money, it actually saved Brazil a lot of money because people weren't going to the hospital, people were productive. I think if you think it's expensive to treat HIV, try not treating it, because Brazil showed that they can save money by investing in treatment. And it won a bunch of awards. It set a model for the rest of the world to follow. So in this graph, the top line is kind of the upper estimate. The bottom line is the lower estimate of people living with HIV and AIDS in South Africa and Brazil. And as you can see, around 1990, it wasn't looking good. I already said Brazil had the second largest epidemic in the world. It was a recipe for disaster. But that's when they worked really hard on prevention and treatment. I don't want to suggest that treatment is the only thing. There's so much that's important for combating HIV and AIDS, but I'm really focused on the treatment side because South Africa's government took a less hands-on approach. They really didn't acknowledge this as a problem until later. And you see the epidemic exploded there. And this isn't a perfect natural experiment. Obviously, there's so many different factors. But I use it to show how badly things could have gone in Brazil if they didn't invest so much effort and time and focus on providing universal treatment. So lessons. I think the greatest takeaway is that assumptions and ideas that we hold to be self-evident, that they can be deadly. The idea that we should prioritize prevention and not worry about treatment in the developing world, that was conventional wisdom for a long time in the early 2000s, late 1990s. And a lot of people died because of that idea that we couldn't invest in their treatment, that we had to protect patent rights in those countries. So, and the idea that patent laws had to be harmonized all around the world, those ideas really matter. Even if we think it's natural that this is how our patent system works, this is how capitalism works, those ideas matter for human lives. And so the question I want to raise to you all is, do we really need patents for innovation? This is a funny thing to be giving a TED talk about because TED is all about innovation, and I love innovation, and it's so great, especially pharmaceutical innovation. It's made all of our lives a lot better. But I'm wondering if patents aren't really the best way to do it, as we've thought for so long. Elon Musk, the famous entrepreneur, he runs Tesla and SpaceX, he has this quote. He actually got rid of all his patents on everything for Tesla. It was this amazing, controversial move that he made. And this is why he did it. He said, if we're all in a ship together and there's some holes in the ship, we're bailing out water, we should share the bucket. And for that, he meant dealing with environmental problems. That's why he's building electric cars and sharing the patents. And he just made like a killing off this. He made so much money earlier this week on just pre-sales, you might have seen. So he didn't need the patents to make all this money in return on his investment. Also famously, Jonas Salk, the creator of the first polio vaccine, he was asked, who owns the patent? And he said, the people, I would say. There is no patent. Could you patent the sun? And now we're close to eradicating polio, partly because of that extremely generous move that he made. He could have profited off that, but he said the people own the patent. And so I don't want to suggest that all we have is problems. I think this is an area where the solutions are too numerous to list on a slide. I just tried to list a few, but there are so many ways that we could do this better. And by we, I actually mean like us in this room, not just like the world. So one way is bargaining down prices. This is what Brazil did. I talked about that already. PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. This was President Bush's big global health initiative that's been so huge and so great. Another is the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. That's a similar concept, only it's multilateral. And both of those have provided treatment to millions of people without resources around the world. Other more innovative solutions are patent pools. That's kind of like sharing the bucket design, to use Elon Musk's quote. Another is the Health Impact Fund. There's a whole other TED Talk about the Health Impact Fund, and it's kind of inspired this one. So I really recommend you all to watch it if you're interested. Government grants, suspending patent rights when they infringe upon the right to health. When we talk about rights in conflict, too often we say patent rights win. In Brazil's case, the right to health won, and I think that needs to happen more often to prioritize human needs over the need for profit. And then the last one is democracy. And I put that last because it really influences all of us. A lot of the reasons these systems exist is because either people have supported them or people haven't not supported them. Or sometimes people just don't know about them. I didn't know about them before I dug deeper, but I found such an interest in exploring this topic and learning more about it. So if you guys think this is interesting, or this piques an interest in you, a passion, or you're just passionate about social justice in general, I implore you to keep looking into it, because the change can happen at our government level. That's how we can truly change the patent system, increase access. Like PEPFAR, that was our government's initiative. So we can do a lot of good, or we can do a lot of bad. But the one thing I want to drive home is that this system that we've inherited from the past, that's not how it has to be. It's not natural, it's not optimal, and it's not ethical. But we can very easily change it and create a new system just by using creativity and thinking outside the box. So thanks. I want to thank Jim Keenan, Professor Dugan, who's in the audience, and most of all, BCTalks for making this a possibility. Thanks, guys.